I heard the scream before I saw the trash can tip. It was the kind of scream that makes a parent's blood go cold. Raw, panicked, coming from a child who knows something is terribly wrong. I dropped the rake, sprinted around the corner, and there he was, my 9-year-old son crawling out of one of those massive green plastic bins, tears running down his dirt-smeared face, and standing 5 feet away, arms crossed, was Karen Head of the HOA gatekeeper of neighborhood aesthetics. Apparently now part-time enforcer of her own twisted version of justice. He was playing where he shouldn't, she said, like she was talking about a stray cat, not a human child. That's the moment something in me shifted. I've kept my temper in check for years, walked away from countless insults, fines, and friendly reminders, posted to my front door. But this wasn't about lawn height or mailbox color. This was my kid. And unfortunately for Karen, she had no idea I was a retired professional MMA fighter. She also had no idea I had video or witnesses or the willpower to bring her down using something far more devastating than fists, the truth. Let me rewind for a second. I didn't move to Whispering Pines to pick a fight. After nearly 15 years in professional mixed martial arts, I was done with blood sweat and late-night travel. My wife passed a few years back, and I promised my son we'd start fresh, somewhere calm, clean air, good schools, quiet streets, and for a while it worked, until Karen showed up with her clipboard and her weaponized neighborhood rules. It started small. A citation for sidewalk chalk, visual disruption to community uniformity. My son had drawn a dinosaur pretty well too, but apparently it was a threat to the balance of the subdivision. Next came the fine for his scooter being left near the walkway, then a warning about unsupervised children in shared green spaces. And then, of course, the classic HOA power move, threats of escalation. I've warned you several times, she said one afternoon while I was mowing the lawn. If you can't follow our guidelines, perhaps this isn't the right place for your family. I've taken elbows to the face with less fury than what her words triggered in me that day, but I stayed calm. For my son, for the chance to live in peace, I played nice, I didn't argue, I documented everything. I started keeping a folder, screenshots of her emails, copies of every fine and friendly notice, photos of my yard perfectly trimmed, scooter parked neatly, no dino chalk in sight. I had been preparing for something like this, I just didn't know what it would be. Then came that Sunday I was working on the garden. My son was playing behind the house near the small patch of HOA-owned green space. Not private property, not someone's yard, just grass and trees. And then I heard the scream. He told me later she cornered him, yelled that he was trespassing, told him he was a nuisance. And when he tried to run, she grabbed him by the arm, dragged him toward the curb where the trash bins were lined up for collection and shoved him inside one. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't enforcement. This was abuse, and I didn't need my fists to fight back. What I had was evidence, a neighbor with a Ring doorbell, camera, a security cam of my own facing the green space, a copy of the HOA bylaws that clearly state children have full access to communal areas with parental permission. I filed a police report, took my son to urgent care, reported the incident to Child Protective Services in the county, and when the HOA issued a formal letter calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding, and warned me about false allegations, I knew I was done playing defense. Karen had thrown a child in a trash can, but she was about to learn what it felt like when someone took out the garbage by the book, by the law, and in front of the entire neighborhood. Coming up next, how I turned HOA policies against their own board, held Karen accountable without lifting a finger. And yes, how she ended up needing an ambulance, because revenge is best served cold, and sometimes it comes with a stretcher. It's funny what you'll tolerate for peace. When I moved into Whispering Pines, I didn't come with an axe to grind. I came with a kid, a lawnmower, and a second chance. I'd spent 15 years inside steel cages with men who wanted to break my ribs, and I was tired. Tired of travel, tired of pain, tired of constantly being on guard. This was supposed to be our quiet life, our clean slate. And for about 3 weeks it was, until Karen showed up. The first time we met, I was setting up a basketball hoop for my son, one of those rolling ones with a sand-filled base. He was 9 and could barely make a layup, but you'd think I'd parked a broken-down Winnebago on the lawn from the look she gave me. She didn't say hello. She said, "That's not allowed." I blinked. "Excuse me, the hoop temporary recreational structures require board approval. Page 14, Section D." I was polite. I smiled. I told her I'd review the guidelines. I moved it to the driveway. Still got a notice in the mail the next day. That's how it started. First it was the hoop, then the chalk drawings, dinosaurs, smiley faces, hopscotch, squares, visual disorder, the letter said. After that it was the scooter left by the front porch, not in the designated storage area. Then the Halloween decorations, one skeleton, one pumpkin, and a ghost made of a bedsheet. Holiday displays must be tasteful and approved. I began to see a pattern. Every time my son existed outdoors, we got a citation. And not a single one of those notices came from a neighbor's complaint. I asked around. Most of them didn't even know the rules Karen was enforcing, but Karen knew Karen wrote them. You see, Karen wasn't just the HOA president. She'd also been on the Architectural Review Board, the Social Committee, and apparently self-appointed herself, the Community Wellness Liaison, which I'm still pretty sure is a title she made up. She was everywhere at every meeting and every email chain. Every rule had her fingerprints on it. She was the judge, jury, and self-declared decorator-in-chief. But I didn't bite. I didn't fight. I'd learned enough from the ring to know that the first one to throw a punch is often the one who loses. I let it slide. I paid the small fines. I stored every notice in a folder marked HOA, evidence, and I started talking to neighbors. An older woman named Ruth told me Karen once fined her for growing marigolds instead of HOA-approved begonias. Another neighbor, Tom, said he got a $50 penalty for painting his shed the same color as his house. Apparently the wrong tone of beige. People were tired, but they were scared too. Karen had a way of making examples out of those who spoke up. Tom's lawn got mysteriously flagged for invasive weeds 2 weeks after he questioned her at a meeting. Ruth's fence was suddenly deemed non-conforming after she emailed the board about her flower citation. This wasn't community management. It was tyranny with a name tag. Still, I kept quiet until that Sunday. My son wasn't even near someone's house. He was on the border of our property in a small community green space. It's not fenced off, not posted, just trees and grass like a tiny patch of forest left untouched behind the homes. Karen claimed he was trespassing. And then she did something I will never forget. She grabbed him by the wrist, dragged him toward the trash bins lined up for collection, and shoved my 9-year-old inside one of them. He tried to climb out. She slammed the lid. The neighbor's security cam didn't catch the moment it happened, but it caught the scream. It caught the lid flipping open. It caught him crawling out, dirt and tears and shame all over his face, and it caught me racing toward them, heart in my throat. Karen didn't flinch, didn't even act surprised to see me. She crossed her arms like she was the victim. He was where he shouldn't be, she said. I've fought men twice my size in sold-out arenas. I've broken bones and taken beatings. Most people would pass out from. But in that moment, it took everything I had not to lose control. Instead, I walked past her, picked up my son, and took him home. I documented the bruises, took photos, recorded his statement, word for word, just like my attorney friend later told me to. Then I filed a police report, took him to urgent care, logged the medical bill. I sent a copy of the evidence to the HOA. 2 days later, they responded with a printed letter on HOA stationery. We regret the unfortunate misunderstanding that occurred on Sunday. The board reminds all residents to refrain from escalating matters through false or exaggerated claims. Repeated misuse of HOA communication channels may result in penalties. They weren't just dismissing the incident, they were threatening me. That's when I stopped waiting. I called my lawyer, filed a formal complaint with the county, and began building something far stronger than a punch a case in Karen. She kept walking around the neighborhood like nothing happened. She thought she'd silenced another resident, scared another father into submission. What she didn't know was that I'd been preparing since the first chalk fine. I had photos, I had footage, I had people, neighbors ready to speak up. Now that someone else finally had the guts to stand in the spotlight. Karen wasn't just about to lose a power trip. She was about to lose the illusion that she was power. And the best part, she wouldn't see it coming. If you think this was wild, wait till you hear what Karen did next. There's a special kind of silence that settles over a neighborhood when things get serious. Not the peaceful birds chirping Sunday morning kind of silence. I'm talking about the kind that hangs in the air, like humidity before a thunderstorm, thick, tense, waiting for something to break. That was the vibe on my street after words started spreading about the trash can incident. People didn't say it out loud, but they were talking behind hedges, over fences, at the dog park, whispering about what Karen did to my son and wondering what I would do next. Karen, on the other hand, she strutted around like nothing happened. She waved at neighbors, tended her roses, even hosted an HOA coffee chat on her porch the following weekend, complete with muffins and fresh squeezed orange juice. like she hadn't thrown a kid into a garbage bin just days before that Sunday morning. I walked by with Jake, my Labrador, and nodded politely at the small group gathered around her. I didn't stop, but I saw a few eyes flick toward me. One woman even mouthed something like, "I'm sorry," as I passed. They knew they were just scared, but fear only works until someone stands up, and I was standing now. First, I filed a formal grievance with the HOA, citing violations of safety, abuse of authority, and misconduct. I attached the footage, the medical report, the letter from my lawyer. They responded with the usual canned language. The board will review the matter internally. Translation, delay, deny, deflect. Fine, I filed a complaint with the county. Karen had falsely claimed my son was trespassing on private HOA land, but the land in question was actually classified as public use, common space under county zoning. That meant she had no authority to remove anyone from it, especially not a minor second. I started reaching out to other neighbors quietly at first. I knocked on doors, had porch conversations. Most were hesitant, a few were dismissive, but slowly the stories started coming out. One man said Karen fined him for non-standard gutter guards. Another said she threatened to report him for operating a home business because he taught piano lessons to 2 kids on Saturdays. One woman got a citation for putting up a bird feeder. Apparently, the HOA handbook claimed they could attract undesirable wildlife. But the worst, a widowed veteran named Don. He showed me a letter Karen had sent him, demanding he repaint his home trim to reflect a more youthful energy. Don was 79, his wife had passed 6 months earlier. He hadn't even taken down her garden flags yet. That's when I knew Karen wasn't just power hungry. She was cruel. I wasn't the only one who saw it. The video of my son, the clip from the Ring camera next door, had made its way around. It wasn't violent, but it was damning. It showed Karen dragging him off screen, then the trash can tipping moments later. You could hear him crying, you could hear her voice cold and sharp. You're being taught a lesson. It didn't take long for the video to land on Facebook, and once it did, the silence broke. The comments came fast. "Is this the Whispering Pines HOA lady? This is disgusting. I know her. She tried to find me for wind chimes. The local news station picked it up the next day. Hoa president under fire after incident with child. They reached out for comment. Karen declined. I didn't. I stood on my porch in a plain polo shirt, my son next to me, and told the truth. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply said, this isn't about HOA rules. This is about basic decency. And if the people in charge can't tell the difference, they shouldn't be in charge. That's when things really shifted. An anonymous petition began circulating online demanding Karen's removal from the board. It reached over 200 signatures in 48 hours. That was more than half the community. Still, the HOA board refused to act. Karen still held power, and she wasn't going quietly. On Tuesday morning, I received a notice from the HOA claiming that I had violated community policy by causing public disruption and negative media attention that could harm property values. Yes, really. They tried to fine me for speaking out about what happened to my son. That was their mistake, because that notice that crossed into retaliation. And retaliation is legally actionable under most HOA governance laws. I passed it directly to my attorney, and we filed a formal cease and desist for harassment. Meanwhile, the board tried to rally behind her, but the neighborhood wasn't buying it anymore. People started showing up to meetings. People who hadn't set foot in the clubhouse in years. They were angry. Not loud or violent, just done being quiet. At the next monthly meeting, the room was packed. Karen stood at the front table, flipping through papers, trying to maintain control. She opened with her usual line, "Let's begin with updates from the maintenance committee." But someone cut her off. "We're not here for leaves and light bulbs," a man said from the back. "We're here because you assaulted a child and you think we're just going to move on." The room went still. Karen's face flushed. "You're out of order," she snapped. "This is not the time for personal attacks. Is that what you call it?" Another woman said, "A personal attack. What about everything you've done to all of us?" It's snowballed. People stood up, one after another, sharing their stories. Some brought letters. Some brought photos. One woman brought a stack of fines so thick she had to use a binder clip. Karen tried to talk over them, tried to adjourn the meeting. But the board and her own allies were rattled. They looked like they'd seen the writing on the wall. One of them finally motioned for a vote. It wasn't a vote to remove Karen, not yet, but it was a vote to call a special session for the entire community to decide her fate. It passed unanimously. Karen stormed out before the meeting ended. The last thing I saw was her red blazer disappearing down the sidewalk. That night, I sat on the porch with my son. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded. Can I draw on the sidewalk again? I laughed. Yeah, bud. I think it's time we got the chalk back out because Karen had ruled through fear and silence. But silence was over now in the community. They were just getting started. If you think this part was intense, wait until you see what happened when the neighborhood turned the tables for good. The special session was set for Thursday evening at the clubhouse. It wasn't a formality this time. This wasn't an HOA meeting tucked away on page 6 of the newsletter. It was the main event, a reckoning. By 7 o'clock, the room was full. Standing room only kind of full. People showed up with chairs from their garages. Someone brought a cooler of iced tea and cups. A man named Walter set up a projector because this time we had visuals. I sat near the back with my son, not because I wanted to be quiet, but because I wanted to give the spotlight to the people who had been stepped on, fined, and ignored for years. Tonight they would speak. Karen entered just before the meeting started, flanked by 2 of her longtime board loyalists. She wore her usual sharp red blazer pearls and an expression that had all the warmth of a DMV clerk with a God complex. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She didn't even pretend to acknowledge anyone. The room quieted, and then the stories began. The widowed veteran went first. He held up the letter Karen had sent him, demanding he repaint his trim because it was too depressing. His voice trembled, but his words were clear. She said, "My home looked like I'd given up on life. My wife had passed away 3 months earlier." She knew that. You could hear a pin drop. Then came Ruth, the marigold lady. She told the room that Karen had threatened to dig up her flower bed if she didn't comply with HOA guidelines. Her crime non-regulation bloom density. Even people who had stayed silent for years were now stepping forward. Someone brought photos of the non-compliant wreath they'd been fined $75 for during the holidays. A father stood up and said, Karen reported his teenager to the police for loitering in their own driveway. Then Walter hit the lights and turned on the projector. The ring footage played again. Karen dragging my son, the trash can tipping, the scream, and then Karen's voice, "You're being taught a lesson." It was damning. No excuses, no editing, just truth, raw and unblinking. When the lights came back on, all eyes turned to Karen. She stood up, smoothed her blazer, and tried to salvage control. "This community has thrived under my leadership," she said. "Order and standards are what keep this place beautiful. And sometimes tough decisions must be made for the greater good." She paused, waiting for applause. There was none. A voice from the crowd cut through the silence. "Is that what you call this, leadership?" The murmurs turned to rumbling. Karen raised her voice. "Let's not forget that property values have increased under this HOA's careful guidance. I've ensured compliance. I've upheld decorum. You've abused people," someone shouted. "You threw a kid in a trash can," said another. Karen's mask cracked. "I did what needed to be done," she snapped. "That boy was disrespecting common property. His father, and that's when I stood. I didn't yell, I didn't pace, I just looked at her and said one sentence, 'Your reign is over.' Then I walked to the front and passed out printed packets. Summaries of over 30 documented violations of HOA procedure, misuse of authority, and personal retaliation, each signed by multiple residents. My attorney seated in the front row nodded once. The board had no choice. They opened the floor for the recall vote. It passed by a landslide. Karen was officially removed as HOA president. Her allies resigned on the spot. By law, a temporary committee would take over until a new election could be held. The community cheered not out of spite, but out of sheer relief. Karen didn't stay to hear the vote totals. She left mid-meeting, stiff and silent, eyes staring forward like she was walking into traffic. That was the last time she stood at the head of anything in Whispering Pines. 3 days later, a moving truck pulled into her driveway. She didn't say goodbye. But justice had been served publicly and thoroughly. I got a letter from the HOA weeks later. An official apology. They reversed every fine I had ever received. My son was offered a scholarship to a local art camp donated anonymously by someone in the community. In the sidewalk, it's now a community chalk space. Kids draw on it daily. No citations, no complaints, just color. Sometimes I still walk by it, Jake at my side, and watch my son sketching dragons and stars and weird little superheroes. He's safe, he's happy, and this time nobody's throwing him in a trash can. If you think this was satisfying, wait until you see what happened when Karen tried one last dirty move and how it landed her in the back of an ambulance. If Karen had any plans of slipping away quietly, she didn't let them show. In the days after the vote, she still walked the neighborhood like she owned it. Chin high back, straight sunglasses that looked like they were borrowed from a 90s soap opera villain. She stopped waving, stopped smiling, but she still showed up to the mailbox, to her roses, to HOA events. She was no longer invited to. You had to admire the delusion. She'd lost her position, her support, her grip on the community. But somehow in that twisted HOA codebook brain of hers, she still believed she could spin this back in her favor. And then she tried. Her final play came on a Thursday. It was garbage day again. I was out front trimming the hedges, headphones in Jake lounging in the shade when I saw the city code enforcement truck roll up. Not a common sight in our neighborhood. They parked, took photos, looked confused. Then one of them knocked on my door. I pulled my earbuds out and walked over. Sir, we received a report about an illegal accessory dwelling unit on your property, the inspector said. Excuse me, anonymous tip. Said you had an unpermitted shed conversion, possibly a rental or business space. I stared at him for a second. You mean my tool shed? Can we take a look? I brought them around, opened the shed, showed them the rakes, lawn bags, spare bike tires, and half a box of old Halloween decorations. They took one look and shook their heads. This is clearly not an ADU. Sorry for the trouble, who filed it? I asked. They glanced at the clipboard. It was anonymous, but we both knew it. I offered them water. They declined, drove off. And that's when I felt it, that heavy, familiar tension in the air again. The humidity before the thunderstorm. That something is about to go down silence. I didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, Karen showed up at my property line. Didn't step over it. She knew better, but stood right at the edge, hands on hips. You think you've won? She asked. I think the community did, I said calmly. She scoffed. You embarrassed me, lied about me, turned everyone against me. No, I replied. You did that all on your own. She opened her mouth to respond, but her voice cracked. It was the first time I saw something that looked like fear behind those dark lenses. And then she did the one thing she always did when she felt the walls closing in escalate. An hour later, she was back with her phone out, filming standing just off my lawn, narrating to her imaginary online followers about ongoing HOA violations, hostile neighbors, and retaliatory conduct. I didn't respond. I stayed inside, called my lawyer. But a neighbor, a new one who had just moved in a month ago, he'd had enough. He walked right up to Karen's car, still parked halfway in front of his driveway, and told her to knock it off. She shouted something about intimidation and menace. He told her to move the car. She screamed, and then she stepped back, tripped over the curb, and fell hard flat onto the pavement. A silence, then a scream that echoed all the way to the cul-de-sac. I've been assaulted, she wailed. By now, more neighbors had gathered, some filming, some frozen in place. The man never touched her. She had tripped herself, but the dramatics were back, and this time they came with flashing lights. An ambulance arrived before the police did. Karen insisted on a stretcher, claimed a broken ankle, accused the neighbor by name of shoving her with intent to injure. But this time the neighborhood had her on tape. Several phones had caught the whole scene. No contact, just words, just Karen backing up, losing balance and eating concrete. By the time the officers arrived, Karen was already in the back of the ambulance rehearsing her lawsuit. But when they reviewed the footage, the officers shook their heads, made notes, and left without making an arrest. Karen's ambulance drove off slowly. Lights off, no sirens. Probably more for pride than pain. She didn't come back home that night. She didn't come back at all. 2 days later, her house went up for sale. No open house, no goodbye party. Just a sign, a silent moving crew, and a black SUV with tinted windows that never parked, just idled at the curb. Gone like a ghost that finally gave up on haunting a place that had stopped being afraid of her. The neighborhood. It exhaled. The next HOA meeting was held under a new banner, a new board, new energy. We passed reforms, real transparency, limited authority, and clear protections for residents, especially families. We even renamed the green space behind my yard. It had never had a real title, just Lot B. Now it's called Chalk Park. Every weekend, kids draw there, dragons, rockets, flowers. One of them drew a house with a heart over it and wrote home, that one made me tear up my son. He doesn't talk about the trash can anymore. He talks about wanting to build a tree house, about the dog he wants to adopt when Jake retires. He laughs again. That's what matters. Karen thought power came from fear, from paper citations and printed rule books. But true power, it's quieter, it's steadier, it's the neighborhood standing together, it's a dad who doesn't back down, it's a child who finds joy in chalk after trauma. I never threw a punch, I didn't have to. Sometimes the best revenge is living in peace while the tyrant moves away, bitter and broken in the back of an ambulance, accompanied by no one remembered, by no one, defended by no one. Justice doesn't always need sirens. But when it does well, the right people end up in the back seat. If this felt like a fitting end, wait till the final part. I'll share what I've learned through all this and what every HOA Karen and every quiet neighbor needs to hear. Some fights aren't fought with fists. They're fought with patience, with proof, with community, with knowing when to raise your voice and when to let silence do the work, with showing your child how to stand tall without ever swinging first. This wasn't the kind of story I wanted to live through, but now that it's done, I'm glad I didn't stay quiet. Because here's the thing, most people don't realize about HOA power. It only works if we let it, if we nod politely, pay the fines, shake our heads behind closed doors, but never push back, never speak up, never ask for better. Karen didn't make that neighborhood toxic on her own. She just took advantage of silence. It was the rest of us, the ones who said nothing for too long, that let her grow roots. Until finally one bad seed turned into a full-blown invasive species. What happened to my son should never have happened. What happened to Don and Ruth and everyone else, Karen targeted, should have been stopped years ago. But when we stood together, it ended. That's the real takeaway here. HOAs aren't evil. They're just tools. They're meant to protect, to preserve, to keep the grass cut and the gutters clear. Not to become mini kingdoms run by self-important monarchs with clipboards and superiority complexes. But they can become that fast if the wrong people are left unchecked. So if you're watching this and thinking, wow, that's wild, but nothing like that would ever happen in my neighborhood, you might want to take a second look at your next HOA meeting agenda. And if you're thinking that sounds exactly like what I'm going through, you're not alone. You have more power than you think. Start documenting, start talking, start knocking on doors. The first few might not open, but someone somewhere will say, me too. And that's how it starts. Not with yelling, with community, with a little chalk on the sidewalk, a cup of coffee shared between strangers, a meeting that goes differently because someone finally showed up. To the Karens of the world, you don't own your neighbors, and to the quiet ones, you don't have to stay quiet forever. You just have to decide one day that enough is enough. And if you've made it this far through my story, I've got a question for you. What's your HOA story? Have you had a Karen in your neighborhood? Have you ever been fined for something ridiculous? Or maybe you were the one who finally stood up. I'd love to hear it. Drop your story into the comments below. Let's turn this into more than just a story. We can make it a movement. If this series gave you chills, made you smile, or reminded you of something you've lived through, hey, hit the like button. Subscribe for more real stories that prove truth really is stranger than fiction. And if you know someone battling their own clipboard crusader, send this their way. They might need the reminder. You're not alone, and the good guys can still win. Thanks for listening. Now, let's hear your story.